Good afternoon. It's as ever, it is a genuine pleasure to stand in front of our members, our guests, and so many people in person. I'm delighted to be chairing the session this afternoon. All four panelists have come up to me and said, is this going to be a slightly less hostile session? To which I said, that's entirely up to the 1,200 people who are sat in this room, so we will see. But I am really pleased to be chairing this next slightly shortened session on food security. It's something that has been touched on so far in every single session we've had today. I don't need to remind you, in 1984, self-sufficiency in this country was 78%. Last year, it was down to 60%. We've touched today on inflation. We've touched today on the sustainable credentials of food. We've touched today on the importance of a balanced diet. Trade and food availability are rising up the agenda with every week that goes by. So we've brought together a fantastic panel, and it really is a genuinely exciting panel. We have Karen Betts with us. Karen recently took up the post of Chief Executive of the Food and Drink Federation, having previously been the CEO of the Scotch Whisky Association, and prior to that, a 16-year career in government, including the Cabinet Office and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. We have Ollie Buston with us. Ollie is the Chief Executive of Future Advocacy, a really forward-thinking think tank and consultancy working on the really big challenges that humanity faces in the 21st century. And prior to his current role, Ollie was a key architect in the Make Poverty History campaign and was the Europe director of Bono and Bob Geldof's One Advocacy and campaign group. We've also got Sam Lowe with us. Sam is Director of Trade at Flint Global, a strategic advisory consultancy, and is a phenomenally influential public commentator on trade and Brexit issues. And we've also got Nick von Westenholz, who doesn't need much of an introduction to most people in this room. Nick is our own Director of Trade and Business Strategy and has led the NFU's international trade work and Brexit policy work for over 5 years now. So I am delighted to be chairing this session. I'm going to kick off with what may be a simple question, but also one I think that will start a discussion in the room. And whilst I set out that question, can I please have Robin Munt to one of the microphones, because I'll be coming to you shortly. But the question I've got, and I'm going to start with Ollie, and that is, what do you believe are the main risks we face in terms of our food supply at the moment?
Thanks very much, Stuart. Wonderful to be here. I guess it's an opportunity to me to sort of say thank you as a non-farmer, non-food producer for all the heroic work that everyone in the room's done to keep us fed over the last couple of years. So thank you for that. I'm here, I think, because we work with Jamie Oliver and an amazing youth-led movement called Bite Back 2030 on the Save Our Standards campaign with the National Farmers Union. And it was an incredibly popular campaign. Over 1 million people signed the petition. 91% of British people don't want us to lower our standards in terms of animal welfare or environmental standards when it comes to imports from other countries. So the public's massively behind you on that. And there was some real impact, I think. The government set up a Trade and Agriculture Commission, which will provide a bit of scrutiny in terms of trade deals and animal welfare and environmental standards. But from my point of view, I come a bit from the perspective of Jamie Oliver's campaigns and this Bite Back campaign, and they're all focused on child health and particularly halving child obesity. So I tend to look at these things a bit from that perspective. And things aren't looking good from that perspective. We just had in this last year the biggest increase in history in child obesity. and particularly if you're from a low-income family, your chance of having obesity is 1 in 3. So, and that stores up some really, really worrying health issues for later in life. So I tend to see these things through the lens of child health, and we're concerned, for example, that the trade deals that we struck with Australia, that we're going to strike with other countries, may lead to a transformation in British diets that shifts us further from the sort of locally produced, healthier, better British fruit and veg towards higher salt, fat, sugar diets. And there's some evidence that trade deals that have been done in the past by other countries of the US and others have led to that. So I guess that's a really major concern is around how these trade deals will affect child health. And in terms of what needs to be done, very quickly, the Save Our Standards campaign was great, and the Trade and Agriculture Commission was great, but even its own CEOs described it as being toothless but hopefully meaningful, which is quite a low bar. So there's a need for more scrutiny there, and specifically we think the government should publish, what are its core standards in terms of animal welfare and environmental standards when it goes into trade deals. And at the moment, there's on the health side, on the child health side, there's zero scrutiny of these trade deals from that perspective. So desperately need some kind of scrutiny, impact assessment of what the impact of these trade deals on child health, child obesity, which is being ignored at the moment, really.
Thanks, Ollie. I think we'll definitely come back to some of that. I think child health is something that's cropped up at this conference in previous years, so I'm sure we will. Karen, you've got some of the biggest names in the food industry within your membership, very much the leading trade association in the food manufacturing sector. Where do you believe the big risks are at the moment in terms of food supply?
Well, thanks, Stuart. And to follow on from what Ollie said, I think I'm here because our industry are your biggest customers. And we are really proud to be big customers of the UK farming industry. And to echo what Ollie said, but also what the Secretary of State said, we have just come through a really, really difficult 2 years. And if it wasn't for the hard work of British farmers, of the food and drink manufacturing industry in this country, of distributors, of retailers, we wouldn't have come through it as smoothly as we have, because, behind the scenes, under the surface, your industry, our industry, have been working really, really hard in a way that has meant, sure, there were some shortages experienced by consumers at various points in the last couple of years, but really in the grand scheme of things, nothing that serious in the end, and that was because we all worked really hard together. So to your point, Stuart, I think that shows just how robust a food system we do have in this country and how well everybody will pull together in moments of crisis. But I think when I look at the risk, when I turn to the things that food and drink manufacturers are facing at the moment, we, like you, are caught in a really worrying inflationary environment. You are all seeing it in a similar way to us. Energy prices have gone up. For us, ingredient prices have gone up. Packaging, that's gone up in cost as well. Logistics, and then, significantly labour. And so all of that, and you'll have seen in the papers, it's been mentioned today already, inflation has hit a 30-year high, and that is putting a real squeeze on companies in our sector. So we've come through this period of crisis, and now margins are really being squeezed with, with costs going up and with difficult conversations happening between producers and retailers. So I think that is a risk, and I think it's a risk in particular to some of the SMEs in the sector, and the backbone of the food manufacturing sector are SMEs. And I think worryingly, as we look out, when it was talked about last summer, inflation was a transitory thing. Well, it hasn't turned out that way. Inflation actually has been pretty persistent. It keeps on going up, and we think that in the food sector it will be with us for at least the rest of this year. So actually that's flagging some quite systemic issues, and a key systemic issue for us, I think, is about labour and how we make sure we can recruit the right labour, the right skills into our industry at a wage level that is affordable for producers' viability.
Thanks, Karen. You're certainly underlying some of the points on labour that were made earlier on in the day, so thank you for that. Sam, where do you believe the big risks are at the moment?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I feel like I should just put my cards on the table and be perfectly transparent about where my general perspective on these sorts of things sit, because I've seen that some people, you can, if you don't do that, you can maybe receive a fairly hostile reaction in this audience. Insofar as my personal view is that self-sufficiency does not breed resilience. I think resilience in the modern world means not only being able to produce food at home, but also having ease of access to other markets as well, so that if a shock does hit either at home or abroad, you can, in the context of this discussion, get food into the country. And on that basis, I'm supportive of a trade deal with Australia. I'm supportive of a trade deal with New Zealand. I have questions about some of the conditions the government did or did not apply to some of that market access, which we can get into later. But that's where I am. But I thought maybe in this context, it would just be more useful for me to provide my analysis on what the government's priorities are, given what it does rather than what it says. And in that context, when I look at its plans for the farming sector, we have to take into account, I know we're not going to talk about pillars anymore, but if we go on the first pillar, reduced market access for UK firms exporting to the European Union. We have tariff-free trade, but there are new regulatory barriers reducing the competitiveness of our products on that market. In terms of inward bounds, the UK's revealed preference is that it's more willing to expose UK producers to competition from abroad. We also have on the subsidy regime a reform that is probably ultimately going to lead to it being more difficult for some farmers to get money, and it's maybe a reduction over time. We'll see how it goes. When you take into account the increased difficulties getting labour, lots of other issues like gas prices and the like. If you ask me what in the long run does the UK's farming industry look like, I would say consolidation and part-time and niche producers with the middle hollowed out. It will mean that's how the UK remains competitive in a global market. That's how it continues to compete with heavily subsidised European agriculture. That's how it manages to compete with the rest of the world. So am I worried about the UK being able to produce food for itself? No, not at all. I think we'll continue to produce food. But I do think it will be produced very, very differently from now.
Thank you, Sam. Now, I want to make sure we've got plenty of time and we get through members' questions this afternoon. So I will come to you in a second, Nick. But I've got a very specific question for you, Sam. And Robin, I will come to you in a second, I promise. I think this probably is a fairly short answer, but we've got a very specific question from Jonathan Little, who wants you to respond to the Secretary of State's suggestion when he spoke earlier that the UK can simply unilaterally terminate any of our newly agreed trade deals with 6 months' notice and by all accounts, apparently little or no repercussions. Any response to that?
I'm sure there would be repercussions, but all free trade agreements do have an exit clause. I'd have to read each individual one to tell you the exact amount of time, but 6 months is pretty common. So the answer is yes.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Nick, I'm just going to come to you and pick up Ollie's point, actually, from earlier on. We're very fortunate. You sit on the Trade and Agriculture Commission. Toothless? That's the commission, not you, Nick, yes. By the way.
I think what's important, somebody made this point to me the other day, is one of the problems is that the current Trade and Agriculture Commission is called the Trade and Agriculture Commission when we already had a Trade and Agriculture Commission, if you see what I mean. There are two Trade and Agriculture Commissions. One, which finished its work back last March, was a policy recommendation commission, and it came up with a report and a whole load of things it advised government to do, some of which government have picked up, particularly actually around exports, where there's been some really good progress. Manette touched on it with agricultural attaches, for example, a commitment to introduce a UK Exports Council to grow our exports. So some very positive things there. Some of the stuff around standards, as Ollie just said, the idea of developing core standards in the UK, a list of those that we can then look at how we safeguard in trade policy, hasn't been looked at all. But that was the work of the first commission. It was a policy commission, and it did its job. This is a much, much different beast. It's been given a very specific role to look at the black and white text of a trade deal, and then to report to the Secretary of State, who in turn reports to Parliament, saying what the legal impact of that deal is on our standards here in the UK. And it can comment more broadly on the difference in standards between the two countries, etc. But it is a very specific role, and it is part of a much broader scrutiny process of trade deals, where select committees are looking at it, for example, Parliament will debate it, etc. I agree with Ollie, it's not good enough, the UK scrutiny of trade deals. It can be improved significantly, but it is probably actually better than where we were maybe 2 years ago. To your point about toothlessness, I'm not quite sure. It's an odd sort of notion that you could have an independent Trade and Agriculture Commission that had teeth, because what you'd essentially be arguing for was something that could veto trade deals, which actually is the job of our elected parliament. And I kind of think that's important, that actually it shouldn't be for the Trade and Agriculture Commission to decide whether a trade deal goes through or not. That's for Parliament that we vote, House Commons we vote in elections. The problem is that their role in that is not strong enough at the moment. And that's it. The fact is, it's not so much the Trade and Agriculture Commission's toothless, it's Parliament's a bit toothless.
Thanks, Nick. Robin, over to you. While we're hearing Robin's question, can I have Ben Robinson and Andrew Harrison to the microphone as well, please?
Previous sessions, including Minette's opening remarks, have touched on the potential emerging markets, with increasing pressure on land use and farmers being seen as having the potential to provide significant mitigation and sequestration contributions, which can be through taking large areas of farmland out of production. Is the direction of policy finding the right balance to ensure our food security isn't compromised in the process?
Karen, I'm going to come to you first. So this is very much picking up as well some of what the Shadow Secretary of State was saying this morning about taking land out of food production, taking away from family farms and using that land for non-food purposes. Any thoughts?
So I think that there are clearly, a bunch of environmental and food production considerations being worked through here. And, we've been at the raw end of those in the last few months on carbon dioxide, actually. And there is a bunch of government work going on trying to do carbon capture. And there are fertiliser companies that produce carbon dioxide. And so far, those things have not come together. And we are still in a pretty tight carbon dioxide market. So yes, it may be that it's sort of one policy arm not quite talking to the other, which is always concerning. In terms of, yes, I mean, that question would obviously have to be looked at in terms of food security as well. And, I mean, again, I say that as we are big consumers of UK farmers' produce. So, for instance, Ribena, I think, buys up 90% of the blackcurrants that are produced by British farms. McCain's, again, equivalently, buys up an awful lot of potatoes produced in the UK. So all of that remains really important to us. But to Sam's point earlier as well, the question of self-sufficiency, I think, is a difficult one. I think that our food companies want to buy so much, as much as we can of UK farming produce. It's not only high quality, but it is proximate. But the UK will never be able to produce all of the food that the UK retailers and consumers demand. We can't grow everything in this country anyway, and/or glass houses and other ways of producing some of the produce that UK shoppers want to be able to buy. You would massively increase your carbon emissions if you were to do that. So from a sustainable point of view, some of that food needs to be sourced overseas. So it's about striking a balance, and the environmental aspects will need to be taken into account as well. But I think where the government has come out presumably takes into account, looking at Nick on this one, you might know the answer, presumably takes into account the self-sufficiency target that they have set. You would like to think it does.
We'll just leave that hanging. Ollie, I want to come to you because I've spent a bit of time talking to some of the youngsters involved in some of your advocacy. And for them, climate change is absolutely up there alongside nutritious food, alongside those big issues that humanity faces. All of those things will rely on the land, as Robin touched on. You know, we will need the land for sequestration, we will need the land for food, we will need the land for access and well-being, and all those things that actually we've enjoyed over the last couple of years. But where do you see this dilemma panning out?
I mean, hopefully there's in terms of the dilemma between climate change and food, hopefully there's a sweet spot there, which is about, you know, the things that are better for the environment, broadly put, are also better for our health. So if we can, you know, we can grow more locally, rely on more local sources of food, if we can, and also eat more fruit and veg and seeds, then that's going to be good for our health and for the environment. So I guess that's that's the sort of, hopefully, the happy middle ground there.
I think it's a really good point there. And I think actually when it comes to fruit and veg, yeah, we should be eating more, but my God, we should be growing a lot more of it in this country as well. I think there's a real opportunity here. Nick, do you want to just come in briefly? As well as being our trade expert, you are also a farmer, Nick. You know, so any views you've got on this multiple land use challenge?
Well, I think Minette referred to it this morning as the sort of the Wild West in a way, the prospects of how this is going to pan out. And I think that's a concern, because there's lots of people sort of almost feel like they're sort of prowling around looking at the various opportunities. And I think as farmers, we need to be really careful how we proceed, because it's very clear we have an amazing asset at our disposal, whether we're landowners or tenants. You know, there is something there which is actually the amount of opportunities that come from that land seem to be growing, but equally perhaps the risks from it, which was what the question was touching on. I think what it comes to is that there's a sort of a more fundamental truth about that uncertainty. And it comes round to what I think has been discussed a lot already today, and in fact, which the three other panelists all sort of touched on in a way as well, which is this lack of coherence in policy making at the moment between what we as farmers should be doing with the land that we farm. And if you look at, for example, trade policy, which seems to be pulling us very much in the direction of trying to compete with very efficient and effective farmers around the world. And that is a legitimate aim of trade policy, to improve competitiveness in domestic economies. But if you're doing that, and at the same time, through your domestic policy, on a number of fronts, whether it be the relationship with the EU, whether it be immigration policy, whether it be the development of elms, you're not really looking at your farmers as profitable food producers. You're wanting them to deliver something else, other things. There's a total lack of join up there. It's totally incoherent. And it's therefore not surprising that there is, what I feel, a significant degree of confusion about what we're being asked to do in the future.
Thanks, Nick. I'm going to come to Ben and Andrew, but I'm going to set a challenge, okay? And this is no criticism of Andrew or any of our other questioners earlier on, but I really want a question to appear on my screen from one of our ambassadors or our next generation members. So there's a challenge out there, and I will buy a drink for whichever of them decides that. That's a drink for whichever of them decides to stand up. By the way, if you want a drink off anyone else, then there's an election tomorrow and there'll be various people around later on. I'm not in it, so don't come and ask me for one. I'm going to go to Ben first. I'm going to take both these questions together because there is a bit of a link between them. So, Ben, if I could come to you first.
Thank you, Deputy President and the panel. There is potential for war in the Ukraine and wider Black Sea region, one of the world's most important areas for cereal exports. Is the maintenance and development of productive agriculture in the UK now a matter of national security?
Thank you. And Andrew, if I could have your question as well at the same time.
Thank you, Stuart. Incidentally, I will take you up on the offer of a drink, even if I'm not next generation. I haven't brought my question with me because I didn't think I was going to get to ask it. But anyway, I'll try and remember it as best I can.
If you get it wrong, I'll remind you what it is after.
Oh, right, that's very good of you. Thank you. Basically, I'm a bit concerned about the way that certain members of the cabinet seem to view food production and food security. The big problem, if global warming pans out as we think it is going to do, is going to be water. And at the moment, the major exporting areas, thinking here principally of cereals, but they are in areas of the world where drought is a problem at the moment. It's only going to get worse. In Ukraine, as has been mentioned, former Soviet Union with Russia, Argentina, Australia, the United States, and so on. And the only alternative where there isn't a drought problem, it would seem, is Amazonia, but we have other issues there. Is it right that we should export our environmental problems to these parts of the world and put our own food sources in peril?
Thanks, Andrew. And if I could have Ali Kappa to a microphone, please. So we've got two points there. One is effectively, for me, wrapped up in global uncertainty. Big political uncertainty, what's happening in the Ukraine at the moment, which is rightly scaring many of us. But also this second point about global warming, about water availability, and about ultimately what appears to be cheap food today may not be cheap food tomorrow. I'm going to come to Sam first this time. So, Sam, any thoughts, particularly on what's happening overseas and how that will potentially undermine food security, or what we should be doing to put in place measures to address that?
Well, I think the answer is fairly similar to the one I gave at the beginning, in that you do have all of this instability. The war in Ukraine is going to push up prices of food, but also gas and oil. We're already seeing today with Putin entering last night that's happened. There are knock-on effects of all of this. So the question is, well, how do you respond? And my answer is that domestic production is a part of that. Of course it is. You don't want to have no farming sector whatsoever. You then have questions about what the government's vision for that farming sector is. I've already articulated how I think, even if they don't say it out loud or even realise it, the direction of travel they're going in. But then there's also the question of broader resilience. And I'm going to use a slight analogy here, but during COVID, the UK nearly ran out of paracetamol. I'm not sure how many people know that. We were 2 weeks away from running out of paracetamol because we imported it all from India. So the question, the DIT did a very good job and got the paracetamol in, good. But the question then is, okay, so is the solution to make all of that paracetamol at home? No, because if you could have an exact same problem at home, you have the facility closed down for some reason, an outbreak of COVID in that facility, it doesn't work. The answer is to diversify your sources of supply. And I think that's the answer in terms of food security as well. Yes, you need domestic production, but it's not a case of saying, and therefore we shouldn't be importing from elsewhere. You need to be able to import from wherever you can at any given time, because you never know when the next crisis is going to be. So that's where I think trade policy does have a role to play, and I'm sure we will get onto it. I do believe you can put conditions on market access into the UK when you start to talk about creating a level playing field for producers. But the default is we should be able to get whatever we need from wherever possible, and that's how you build resilience.
Well, look, let's just follow that on, because I'm really keen, and the session is ending up being cut short. So why don't you just carry on there, Sam, with this point that what worries people here is that unlevel playing field. It is the points that Andrew Ward made earlier on about products and chemicals and practices that are allowed elsewhere, not allowed here. How do you square that one off? You're a real expert in all of this area.
So one of the issues with this discussion is that there's a lot of conflating of two different issues, and the Secretary of State actually did this. There is food standards in terms of what you're actually putting in your mouth, and then there's how they're produced. In terms of food standards, despite concerns from some sectors, it appears that the UK is retaining most of, if not all of the approaches that we inherited from the European Union. The Secretary of State mentioned the ban on hormones, which actually bridges both, and the like. But the concern that I hear from the agricultural sector is about how things are produced. And then one of the questions was around pesticides. So you get discussions, why are you allowed to use pesticide X over there and not here? And the answer is, well, because we've got maximum residue levels, which means that you can use it over there, but it can't. But then it gets to the point, well, but could you condition preferential market access? So in the context of a trade agreement, could you say to another country, look, we're going to give you tariff-free access, but we're going to ask that as a condition of that tariff-free access, you abide by certain production standards. Is that something that you can do? The answer is yes. You just have to get the other country to agree to it. And my question with some of the agreements that were recently struck, I've already said I support the UK-Australia agreement. If I was an MP, I would vote for it now. However, do I think that the UK could have inserted more greater conditionality in that? Yes, because the market access offer is so good. You're giving duty and quota-free trade for most products to Australia. No one else does that. I mean, you know, they really try hard not to. The EU isn't going to do that. So if you're doing that, could you say, as a condition of that market access, we want you to abide by rule X, Y, Z? The Australians will say no, right? But will they say no forever? Will it take longer to negotiate this deal? Yes. But because of how good the market access offer is, do I think the UK could have pushed a bit harder and got a bit more? Also, yes.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to the two questions, particularly the one around Ukraine, what's happening out there at the moment. You know, your members will be live to this as we speak at the moment. Karen, any thoughts from you?
I think to the question that was asked, you know, food security absolutely is national security. The situation in Ukraine and Russia is messing with food and commodity prices. Now, wheat, obviously, oil, sunflower oil, maize oil, rapeseed oil, and of course there is an impact into fertilizers where Russia produces a lot of fertilizer, and gas prices. So yes, that is feeding into the inflationary problem that we're in. When you look at it as a food security issue, we have to remember, I think, that we are a high-income country, and this situation is a lot better for us than it is for African countries that are depending on wheat exports from Russia at particular prices. But still, that is feeding into the inflationary environment that we are seeing now. And to bring that then back onto trade, I think to Nick's point about is government policy joined up. I mean, trade policy should be able to work for the UK food and drink sector, for the UK agri-food sector, just as trade policy should work for other sectors of the UK economy. But really what we need as producers, what you need as farmers, is the government to have a very strong assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of our sectors in the UK, understand then where trade policy needs to support those, and then understand the UK's competitive advantages. Where can we actually go out and export? Where do we produce things in agri-food that is really a strength and something that we could gain from? We could grow those sectors, we could get market access overseas. And that's the point that I think is still missing for me. So Russia-Ukraine sort of comes into that mix, but I don't think, you know, it's not a critical issue for us. It is an inflationary issue, but it's part of a mix. But really, if we were to have full confidence in trade policy, we would want that really good understanding of, as I say, the strengths and weaknesses and the competitive advantages of the sector in the UK, and then making sure that trade policy is serving that.
Ollie.
I was going to say that I agree with Nick as well, which is a bit... I
was going to say, there's a phrase we heard a few years ago.
Didn't turn out so well, maybe. But on 2 points. One is on the Trade and Agriculture Commission, which I think, although it's, it may not... the problem isn't with the Commission as much as the system it sits within that lacks teeth, and that's why we need the government to publish its standards about, what are its animal welfare standards and its environmental standards that it's going to go into these trade deals with. I also agree with Nick on the need for more, a joined-up approach. So, for taking the Australia trade deal, for example, we've signed that trade deal. At the same time, we have a government that has quite a strong child obesity strategy. But the Australia trade deal will allow a massive increase potentially of sugar into the economy, and which is bad. It's probably bad for, I imagine that's bad for beet producers as well as for the nation's health. And that seems a bit contradictory. And then there's also the, when the Prime Minister was promoting the Australia deal, he was waving a pack of Tim Tams, which are the Australian equivalent of penguin biscuits, basically. And that was the big sort of opportunity, was that we were, I guess it's either we're going to eat fewer penguins or we're just going to eat more chocolate biscuits, but neither feels particularly sort of great for us as a country. And so I think, there's a risk potentially with some of these trade deals, as happened with Mexico and Canada when they did deals with America, that it could lead to an influx of unhealthier food from a high salt, fat, sugar perspective. And there's also, I think, a bit of a chilling effect on government policy. So we know that the US, for example, has leaned quite heavily on trade partners not to introduce clearer labelling on food, clearer nutritional labelling. So there's that kind of potential chilling effect on the ability of the government to introduce public health policy as well, which is a bit worrying. And as Nick said, it should all be a bit more joined up.
I just wanted to link actually with, and there's no answer to this, but I wanted to link it with some of what Andrew was saying. And you touched there about high sugar foods, high fat food. There's also the reverse of that. So Andrew was talking about the importance of water, something that potentially we've got a competitive advantage of in this part of the world. We shouldn't be importing so much fruit and veg from other parts of the world with the embedded water. Actually, that should be an opportunity going forward for us in that sector, which has the positive health connotations to it, which I think is something we shouldn't miss. Now, I am now regretting what I offered a few minutes ago. So I'm going to take a question from Ali Kappa. Then can I have the following, okay? 2 microphones. Jessica Langton, Zoe Legg, Joe Bramall, and Gareth Staples-Jones. If all 4 of you can first of all come to the microphone, and then I'm going to do a disappearing act this evening. But Ali Kappa, and can we keep the questions short and the answers equally short as well, so I can get through a few more? Ali, over to you.
Thanks very much, Stuart. And thank you, panel. I think this has been an excellent session. Sadly, about incoherent government policy, it certainly is feeling like that in the fruit, veg, plants and flowers sector at the moment. It strikes me that we have a government who is striving for a lower environmental, lower carbon footprint on one hand, but on the other, through government policy or lack of intervention, fuelling inflation in labour, energy and fertiliser, all of which is going to decrease home production, and simply we will see more imports coming in. That's what the retailers will do. I understand why. But surely the securest food is that which is grown here in the UK. Discuss.
Nick, short answers to a complex question.
I mean, yes, I think there's sort of 2 aspects to this. One is the one that I already mentioned. It's that the fact that the incoherence of domestic policy and trade policy, talking about the need to improve the sustainability of food production and the sustainability of the food that we consume in the UK, but actually kind of relinquishing a degree of control over actually how that food is produced, because we're importing more and we have less agency of the rules and the laws that govern that imported food. But I think there's another aspect to this, which is, the government has talked a very big game about its carbon commitments, its net zero commitments and sustainability. And it's a rather old-fashioned view that you keep trade policy totally divorced from any other of your policy goals. There are those who make that argument, but I think it's nonsense. I think in the 21st century, you use whatever tools are at your disposal, and the government has a big opportunity to use its trade policy in the way that it might use its diplomatic policy or its development policy to achieve other goals, and to actually do what Sam was talking about, where you actually put some conditionality on allowing access to your amazing market. They haven't done that, and I think that's really missing an opportunity. They've still got the opportunity because they've got a whole load more trade deals which they're negotiating right now, but at the first time of asking, you know, they've failed. I mean, we've got 2 deals on the table now, and they're just frankly quite old-fashioned transactional market access type trade deals.
I disagree with Advocacy.
Look, I'm going to, and apologies, we're going to have to rush on. One of the things that I have thoroughly enjoyed is working with our ambassadors and our next generation guys. They are genuinely inspirational, and certainly I think some of the questions are going to be really good. So I do want to get through these 4, and apologies, that means we're going to be slightly late. I'm going to go to Zoe first. Now, I just want to say something before Zoe asks her question, and that is anyone who read Zoe's piece in the Farmer's Guardian last week, it is one of the most outstandingly powerful reads I have had for a long time. So thank you, Zoe, on behalf of all of us for what was an incredible opinion piece.
And equally, thank you so much for the support that the agricultural community has given me over the years, and I know that my father would be incredibly proud of me stood up here today, and so I do thank you for that. So in terms of food security, I see the biggest risk to be the change in diets towards highly processed and imported plant-based diets, which are only increasing our need to import these fashionable foods, and some would argue making our diets more unhealthy. Social media especially is playing a role in these diets, and many people are not aware of the implications, such as the avocado. What do you think can be done to tackle this issue?
Ollie.
Could you just...
So the move towards plant-based diets as the answer to the question, and then touching some earlier, Minette was touching on how actually a lot of these are potentially highly processed manufactured products. So that move to plant-based diets, and also how social media is playing a very important role in diet change, not always necessarily for the right reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd advocate for a move towards more locally produced, more fruit, more veg, and that would be a good direction of travel without being over the top about it. I think, I think you were saying Stuart, about the decrease in vegetable production in the UK, and my understanding is that the amount of land that's used for vegetable and fruit production is massively decreased over the years, and surely there are some opportunities for government to try and help grow that a bit. I'm thinking about, for example, procurement schemes where surely there should be a bit more emphasis on quality there rather than cost, on local production, on fruit and veg, for example, and on things like, we have a school fruit and veg scheme where I think 15% of the fruit, 15% of the apples comes from the UK, which is bananas. Sorry about, pardon the pun, but there's more that can be done there to improve procurement, to make it help local producers that sweet spot between local producers, farmers, and health. There's more that can be done there. On the role of social media, I mean, we've looked at that from a slightly different angle, which is the extent to which young people in the UK are absolutely bombarded with junk food ads online. So there are 500 adverts a second are hitting British kids for junk food, and that's really really influencing them. One of the young people we work with, Dev, had this great line that he hears more from Domino's than from his gran. I mean, he's getting, every time, Friday afternoon, he's knackered, he's hungry, he gets pinged by Domino's, because they're smart. And so we've got to try to take junk food out of the spotlight a bit for these young people, and put a bit more, shine a bit more of the spotlight on healthier, locally grown fruit and veg, I think.
Thank you, Ollie. I'm going to be really unpopular now. I'm not going to be able to take all the questions. So is Joe Bramall around? I'd like to take Joe's question, and then I'm just going to quickly sum up. So apologies to Gareth, and apologies to Jessica. I will buy you a drink, okay? I promise that. But unfortunately, you won't get your question, or I'm going to get shouted at by someone else. So Joe, for the last question.
Thank you, Stuart. Just a quick question from me. Does the increasing use of artificial intelligence and robotics in UK agriculture risk our own food security from the likes of rogue states launching cyber attacks?
Karen, your members in the manufacturing sector are using phenomenal technology these days. Are they worried about cyber attacks, and what are they doing to protect themselves?
I think, new technologies, digitization, automation, they are used more and more in food manufacture. And they have, they are showing that they are increasing our productivity, which is a good thing. So we are able to produce more products of a higher quality, and higher productivity generally raises wages. So that is all positive. But I mean, yes, as soon as you get into operating in a technology-driven space, you have to be very careful about cybersecurity. And I think all companies nowadays, not just in our sector, are very careful with how they protect their online presence and the links to their online presence to their operations. We take heed of the warnings from the National Cybersecurity Centre and others. Most recently, I think this weekend, that the situation in Russia and Ukraine could potentially up the number of cyber attacks on British or on Western companies. So yes, that's important, but no, I don't think it's a reason not to do it. It frees up some roles. It takes the back-breaking work out of some of the roles in our industry and enables the people who would have done those jobs to do more interesting, more engaging types of work. So in general, I think it's a good thing, but yes, you need to have your protection in place.
Thank you. Sam.
I would just add that yes, it is a new risk, but there were risks with the old model. For example, not being able to have access to all the labour you needed because everyone went home or the government changed its immigration regime, right? So yes, there are risks with a new approach, but there are always risks. And of course, they need to be managed. I suppose the supplementary point I would make is that if that is the direction of travel, which I believe it is, automation is probably only going to be fully accessible to those farmers or investors with access to large pools of capital, which, to my mind, does drive the move towards consolidation within the sector, at least in many areas.
Thank you, Sam. Look, we have massively overrun, for which I apologise. I've just got a couple of announcements before I thank the panel. First of all, when you leave here, can you please go straight to the sector breakouts rather than going via the tea room? So apologies for that. There will be refreshments outside the rooms, so please go straight to there. Can I also remind you that dinner starts at 7:15 and the doors will be open at 6:45, and we are back in this hall tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock for what will be an incredible session with the World Farming Organization President Theo de Jager, who I think you will all find extremely interesting. I'll echo what Ali said. I think this has been a really good session. We could have gone on a lot longer, for which I apologise. But can I particularly thank Ollie, Karen, Nick and Sam, and can you all give them a round of applause?